Did it just fucking crash? Are you fucking me? That was literally my first fucking game! What the fuck? Quake Champions is of this review the most recent Quake game. It is the first main series Quake game in 12 years. Released on August 27th, 2017. It is also the first Quake game made by id Software since Quake Live, and the first wholly original Quake game by id since Quake 3 in 1999. It's been a quarter of a century since Quake was created, and the gaming landscape has changed considerably since then, so I'm interested in seeing how Quake Champions attempts to integrate Quake's classic style into more modern gameplay sensibilities, if it even bothers at all. Can Quake bridge the gap between old and new, or have we truly gone over the hill? Oh, one last thing. This review is going to be a bit different from my last three. Quake Champions is an online multiplayer game with no real single-player content or anything to speak of. The game is meant to be played for a long time, and content is drip-fed to the player rather than all immediately laid out. So I didn't get to play every character, and I didn't get to try out every map. This review is more on the general game itself rather than an analysis of every bit of content here. Maybe Hot Rockets will be the definitive life-changing experience that multiplayer games have been missing all these years, but I wouldn't know. As a multiplayer game, it's not surprising that Quake Champions doesn't have much of any story content. You can unlock these lore scrolls to read in the main menu if you really care. There's also the biographies of each character that appear on the character select. If you couldn't tell by my tone, none of this really matters much. The Quake series is at its best when it's not trying to explain the bizarre realities you blow to pieces. And while I'm not against the story in a Quake game, it's not really what I'm after in a multiplayer shooter. I'm more interested in how these places looked and why they looked that way. And on the subject of looks, man is it surreal to see a Quake game rendered in the level of detail Quake Champions shows off. The game looks fantastic, both at a standstill and during combat.
Prepare to fight. Round begins in 3.
I'm also very glad to see the eldritch surrealism of Quake 1 make a triumphant return after its complete absence from Quakes 2 and 4. While the aesthetic was in Quake 3 to an extent, here it is played up for all it's worth. Levels are often outlandish in their appearance, with weird and unexplained visual set pieces to make them distinct. Whether it's something as tame as a giant chained up eyeball, or the end of times just hanging out in the background, Quake Champions finally shows us the goods we've been missing since 1996. I'm also glad to say that the character designs are just as odd and disparate as the levels they fight in. Much like Quake 3, you have everything from regular humans to mutants to robots and all sorts of other weirdo shit. Man, it almost makes me bitter after having to slog through the strog throughout Quakes 2 and 4 to see Quake 1's inspirations finally continued on. This is really what I've wanted from the series in terms of its aesthetics. Better late than never, I guess. The soundtrack is also a major improvement over previous titles. Champions has some quiet ambient tracks like Quake 1 had, but there's some real bangers in here as well. Every level has a unique track too, which is a nice consideration to keep things from getting too repetitive. You know, all that's nice, but let's get on to what really matters, the gameplay. Quake Champions is a continuation of the lightning-fast, tightly designed deathmatch action of Quake 3. It borrows its core gameplay loop from that game, so it's already a solid foundation to work on. I'll instead focus on what's changed rather than what's the same. Starting with the arsenal. Most weapons here are returning from older titles, the only exception being the Tri-Bolt launcher. It's an update on the grenade launcher of old, firing 3 micro grenades that explode on contact with surfaces after about a second rather than one powerful bouncing grenade. It's also the worst weapon in the game again. Yep, even when the grenade launcher isn't the grenade launcher, it still sucks. Ouch. Everything else checks out though, so just avoid the Tri-Bolt and you'll do fine. Power-ups also make a return, working off of a visible timer in level. The thankfully returning quad damage and the protection power-up will take turns spawning on specific parts of maps. Quad damage is the same as ever, but protection works differently than it did as the pentagram of protection from Quake 1. It's no longer complete invincibility, just somewhere close to it. Those are really the most noteworthy changes, but the main selling point of Quake Champions isn't what it changed, but rather the one big addition to the Quake formula it brought. Unlike previous games, your chosen character actually matters now. Every character has a unique special ability, passive abilities, and differing stats from one another. So picking someone isn't about how much you like the model, but rather how the abilities will benefit you within gameplay. There are 16 characters currently within the game, all with differing abilities from one another, though you start with only the Ranger unlocked. There are 2 other characters that can be selected, but these will only stay around for a week before switching to 2 other characters. Other characters can also be unlocked with an earned in-game currency called shards or a purchasable currency called platinum. Now, I didn't play every character for this review. I mean, I have a life after all, but I was able to try a chunk of them. I didn't like all of them, but there were some I had a good time with. The first character I purchased with shards was Kill. He's a bulky dude, starting with some extra armor and a resistance to splash damage. He also gets the ability to chuck up to 5 grenades whenever he wants, and I can say these will be the best grenades you use in this game. He can also replenish his stock just by picking up ammo packs, so you just get to constantly rain suffering down around the map, which is a pretty good time. I think Strog and Pika are my favorite champion though. One of this dude's passive abilities makes it so anyone you kill or get an assist on will drop a Stroylant capsule you can pick up the heal with. If you have full health, you even get a chunk of overheal for it, and as a result, he has great survivability. His ability isn't anything to scoff at either, and it's the safest way to take out an enemy using quad damage. Now, the character you pick is good and all, but it's just as important to find out where you're taking them. I'm glad to say that Quake Champions maps are pretty solid all around. I'm not a fan of all of them, but I had a good time on most of them. I mainly wasn't a fan of the maps that really rewarded camping though. Some maps have weapon spots that are very difficult to reach, meaning that camping them can deprive enemies of a good tool. I didn't do any camping myself because I like to play games generally, but I was certainly the victim of it. Blood Covenant was the worst offender of these maps. I had a miserable game against an entire enemy team that loved camping, and this map loved them right back. This map has really long sightlines throughout it, but the railgun has been placed in a difficult to reach spot. So this asshole here spent most of the game crouching in a door frame here, spamming at anyone who appeared in his sightline. The worst part is that his teammates defended the one flank route that reached him, so we got to do this all for free. Though Blood Covenant is in the minority of maps that reward this type of play, I would have liked to try a champion of more diverse movement options to reach him, but I couldn't because Quake Champions is rather stingy with characters. Oh man, okay, I said it. Okay, let's get into the main problem I have with this game. Quake Champions is a free-to-play game with in-game microtransactions. I don't have a problem with that in of itself, but I do have a problem with how the game locks playable characters behind either a massive grind or a paywall to skip it. Now, I should say that I decided to buy the game's Battle Pass. I'm not mad about the purchase because I think Quake Champions is a good game, and $10 is less than what I paid for Quake 4 anyways. But I hate how stingy the game is with the most interesting part of it. You start with count it, one character when you boot up Champions for the first time. The Ranger is the only character you get with no strings attached. While there are 2 other characters available to play, they are only playable for a week, and then the selection moves to 2 others. The amount of grinding you have to do is made so much worse because you barely get any variety while you're stuck in it. I don't know why it had to only be one character that's given to you at the start of the game. Why couldn't it have been, say, 6 or 8 characters that you start with, then you unlock the others? It would have massively cut down on the grind while giving players variety without seeming overly stingy. I don't want to seem like a complete prude either, because I understand why microtransactions are in the game. I don't have a problem with them when it's only cosmetics locked behind them, which Quake Champions mostly does, but it's just this grind to unlock the champions even when you put $10 on a battle pass rubs me all sorts of wrong ways. One thing I should mention also is that you can simply purchase all the champions for a flat $20 fee. It bypasses the grind, but it's a pretty steep price for a free-to-play game, especially because doing it this way only gives you the characters. Man, it bums me out too, because I really do like Quake Champions. It's the best Quake game I've been able to play since the first one. It's just these practices of trying to wring out money from players for gameplay content feel scummy. And it's an unfortunate pill that you have to swallow to be able to enjoy what is otherwise a very well designed arena shooter with great production values. Overall, Quake Champions is a damn fine arena shooter that is held back by some unfortunately greedy decisions regarding gameplay content. If you're able to tolerate these decisions, you'll find a game it's easy to lose time in, but I wouldn't hold it against you if you decided to steer clear of the game because of its approach to microtransactions. And that's every mainline Quake game reviewed. There's a couple of things I didn't talk about, like enemy territory Quake Wars or the 2 expansion packs for Quakes 1 and 2, but I hit the most important things. I'll probably come back for those expansion packs and maybe Quake Wars, but that'll be for a later time. As for my thoughts on the series itself, man, what a bizarre journey Quake is, not only from the games themselves, but their place in gaming history. Quake is some of the most influential games ever, and also some of the most forgettable games ever. The series has spent a quarter of a century fighting itself in almost every way, from gameplay style to aesthetics to story to even how to adapt to changes in the gaming landscape. It's no surprise that the development of the first Quake tore apart the original id Software team. The series practically uproots itself for every new game, and it seems nobody truly knows what Quake is. I can't say I really know what Quake is either, even after having played the 5 main series games. Though what I can say is that it's been one hell of a trip. Quake was the game to coin the term first-person shooter, and the constant refining led to the innovation of 3D gaming, machinima, competitive shooters, speedrunning, and even other games cut from Quake's cloth. The influence of some of these titles far exceeds anything that was done within them, and even a quarter of a century following the first game's release, we still see this legacy continue on. Quake may have fallen to the wayside after the 90s, but you're never truly dead until you're forgotten, and I think Quake has a long life ahead of it. Now that we've done the bulk of Quake, it's time to give my current thoughts on this channel and the future of it. I'm pretty happy with these reviews. The Quake scripts have been the longest things I've ever typed. They generally tend to end up at around 2,000 to 3,000 words. Luckily, I'm a pretty fast typer, but it's still been a finger-blasting ride. Personally, if there are 2 things I would change if I had the experience doing this now, it would be the humor and the depth of each analysis. I could definitely use more jokes to have these reviews come off more natural, and I also wish I'd gone more into the legacy of each game and the multiplayer content. So in future videos, I hope to paint a better picture of games outside of the content within them. Still, for my first long-form videos I've ever made, they could have been way worse. Yeah, except for the commentary. I really need to get better at speaking, but I can refine that in future videos. Now, the future. I definitely want to keep making these videos. They're a lot of fun to make despite the clinical tone of my analysis. So my plan for the next couple videos is to focus on games that aren't a part of a series. I just want to be able to sink my teeth in some bite-sized projects. So next up is Heavy Bullets, a recommendation for my brother to check out. After Heavy Bullets, I'm thinking of looking at Gato Roboto. And as for series reviews, I have a couple down the line. The next series I plan on looking at is the 2 Mirror's Edge games, and after that, expect to look at Max Payne or maybe even Half-Life. And eventually at some point down the line, I'll return to id to check out the Doom series. Though not real soon because I've had enough of arena shooters for now. There's still a couple of loose games I want to take a look at as well. Dusk, Killing Floor 2, Nova Drift, and Proteus when they leave early access, and more. Needless to say, this channel has a lot of work cut out for it, but hey, that's half the fun, right? This has been Moonrat, and I'll see you next time.